Well, hello, and thank you for joining us today for the Experience of Medal of Honor Recipients, Everyday Life and War. I'm Noelle Wall. I'm the Director of Education at the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, and I'm joined by Jowdy, the Society's Archivist and Historical Collections Manager. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Noelle.
We're coming to you today from the Medal of Honor Museum on board the USS Yorktown at Patriots Point in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. So the museum here where we are is adjacent to the headquarters of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. And the museum houses part of the collection of the Society's archives, with the rest of them being stored in those headquarters offices next door. And some of the items that we're going to discuss today are part of that permanent collection that resides here in the museum that we had the privilege of being able to kind of pull out of the display cases to show with our audience today. And some of them are actually from your archive that aren't on display, right? So a special treat.
Exactly, it's a special treat. We do try to rotate our displays every now and again as well to take some of those items out of storage, but to be able to pull them out like this and tell, a good story about each one to our viewers is really exciting.
Yeah, and so we have objects here that are going to help us understand those everyday experiences of Medal of Honor recipients over various periods and conflicts, kind of to get a picture of what their life might have been like. So for all of you at home, on your screen today, you're going to see a couple of things. You'll see a Q&A box and a chat box. For that Q&A box, feel free to drop in a question at any point. We'll take a look as we go, and then we'll also set aside some time at the end to answer questions that come in during the course of our broadcast today. And then keep an eye on that chat box as well. Feel free to drop your name and organization in there. But our team will also be dropping in some useful links in that chat box, including direct links to our website that are going to be most relevant about the recipients who we're going to talk about, as well as some other resources that you'll be able to find there. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, hi, Laura.
Hi, Noelle.
I'm so excited we're going to get the chance to chat today about these kind of objects that we see here. We covered this a little bit in our last webinar, and if you were there, that's great. If you were not, you can find that in our video library on our website. And in that webinar, we talked a lot more about the medal itself and the evolution of the medal and its design over time. So a great resource if you haven't watched it, I do encourage you to do it. But for those of you who weren't there and are going to check it out later, Laura, can you tell us a little bit about your role as an archivist and what that kind of means to the society?
Right. Well, a big part of the society mission is the legacy of the Medal of Honor and the recipients. So really my job is to preserve the legacy and keep it secure for the future. So what we do actually as archivists is we catalog and organize things so that they're retrievable in the future. So future historians, future people who do exhibits, can actually, access the materials and use them, for education or just for their own knowledge. And it's actually a really exciting job because I get to actually touch history.
Nice, yeah. And so what role does the museum we're in today play in your job and in your work?
Right, well, the museum is one of those places where we'll do exhibits of the objects that we have in our collections and we're able to share with the world. So it's one of the main vectors we have for sharing the items that we've collected in these bits of history. In addition to our website, of course, which has a database of all 3,500 plus recipients. You can see their citations, you can learn about some of their biographies. We have blogs, we have videos, we have living histories, which are interviews with the recipients. So it's really just kind of, the museum really is kind of the physical manifestation of my job.
Yeah, and so that combined with the website and then these webinar opportunities to be able to get the message out about these objects, about the things that you have in the collection. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who were on our first webinar or have looked at the website or know a lot about the medal, they probably know what's behind us, but can you quickly tell us what these three objects are here in the display case?
Yes, there's really only one Medal of Honor, and this is kind of hard for some people to wrap their minds around, but there's really only one award called the Medal of Honor, but there are three designs. So we've got the Army design behind myself, and over here behind Noelle, we have the Air Force design, and then we have the Navy design here in the middle, and that is the design that also goes to the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps recipients. And we've got them here in the museum kind of blown up so people can see them in a lot of richness and detail. So these are our models of the medal, and we thought it was important that people have that kind of visual today.
Great. So we have these objects on the table representing 10 different recipients. So we're going to spend some time talking about those recipients and their story, and then also talking about the objects themselves. We are going to be going in chronological order, essentially. So we're going to start with Civil War and go up through to Vietnam. And as I mentioned earlier, all these are going to be everyday objects that are going to reflect and represent those Medal of Honor recipients' life in war, but really are a reflection of service members in general and kind of what how those Medal of Honor recipients' experience is kind of broadcast more out is kind of a reflection of the larger military experience.
Okay.
So we want to get started?
I think we should.
All right, let's do.
So we're going to start with the Civil War today. You know, back in the Civil War is where the Medal of Honor started, so it makes sense we start there. This piece belonged to a man named Charles Depuy, and he was part of the Michigan Sharpshooters. He had served in an artillery unit, so when they got to a point where some artillery needed help being used, he jumped in and was able to help defend the fort. So he received the Medal of Honor for that. And what we have today, this is actually him here in this picture. I know it can be a little hard for viewers to see, but this picture is also on our website. And I believe his page has been dropped into the chat. So if you want to click on that, you can see a clear picture. But this is the object we have that's attached to him. We actually have a rather large collection attached to him, but this is one of the more interesting pieces. This is a field mirror, and you see here his initials and his name are engraved in it. And you have the 1st Michigan SS Sharpshooters, not the World War II SS. And here on the back, he's also put his name. And what this is, when I say field mirror, if I take, it would have swiveled like this. And this hollow here would have had the mirror piece in it. So the glass is unfortunately missing, but it's a really interesting piece because this would have been a very personal piece that he carried with him. To maintain his personal hygiene.
So why would, this might seem like an obvious question, but why was a mirror something that was important enough for him to not only have in the field, but then to keep?
Exactly. Well, even in the Civil War, there were strict regulations for the wearing of facial hair or your hair or, your body. So this would have helped to maintain, the neatly trimmed beard perhaps, or even for shaving. I believe he was a man who shaved, but in this picture, he does have a mustache. So he very well may have had that during the Civil War. So regulations would have required him to keep that, nicely trimmed and ready to go. So this mirror obviously would have helped him do that. And it's a very personal piece that he would have carried with him.
So you got this as part of a collection? A
larger collection, yes. And the family who donated it to the society was, they're lovely people, and there was just a huge collection that had been maintained over time, including his Grand Army Republic medals and a few other pieces. But I really like this piece because of the story it tells.
So did you know that what it was when you first saw it?
I did not. It's kind of a rare piece. When I got here, I thought maybe he kept his, his wadding paper in there for his weapon, but it took me about 5 or 6 years to find the right person to ask what it was, because a lot of these didn't survive. A lot of these personal items kind of disappeared over the years because they were just seen as mats and mirrors, so it's not something that people necessarily would have kept. So it's really interesting that this survived this long and that we're able to help preserve it.
And that's part of the work of an archivist, is kind of finding the mystery and then finding the answer to the mystery. It's good that this one had a happy ending.
Exactly. I was so relieved when I found out it was someone finally who can tell people about it.
Well, this has some age on it, but it's held up remarkably well.
It has.
The collection was well preserved.
Exactly.
So we're lucky to be able to kind of have that. So what about this next item that we have here?
This is a little hand-sewn bag, and this was hand-sewn by Medal of Honor recipient Robert Galbraith. And you can see here, he even had little tassels to it. And this is a piece he sewed while he was in the Navy, and he was part of the Philippine insurrection. And we've got a photo of him as well. Actually, we don't have a photo of him. This is part of his story as a Medal of Honor recipient. These are called wigwag flags, and they were an early sort of form of semaphore, which in today's Navy, you might have flags that a specific flag stands for a certain symbol or letter or has a specific meaning. These 3 flags were used in a way that a certain way of waving them spelled out an idea or a thought, kind of like Morse code. If you think about how the dashes and dots all form, coherent thought. These flags, depending on how they were waved around the person, convey the thought or the message. And Robert Galbraith stood up under enemy fire and was waving these flags around, communicating back with his commanding officer. So he received the Medal of Honor for that very great bit of bravery right there. He was obviously a great target.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Standing up and waving a flag under fire.
Yeah.
Not the safest approach. And so that is kind of part of his lore. That's part of what the public knows about him is the story of the citation, which you can find on our website. And then these flags and kind of how that part worked. And so the collection of the object of this hands-on bag tells about a little bit of a different side of him.
It does, and it really represents how, you know, especially in particularly the Navy where you're out on a ship or what have you, you have to make do with what you have. So if something needs mending, you have to mend it. And if you need a small bag to carry around personal items in, you have to create it from probably scrap fabric laying around. And so it's really a representation of the skills you had to have and the make do kind of mentality sometimes you have to have when you're in the service.
And we think about service members having to have a very particular set of skills that usually involves some marksmanship or strength. But a lot of these show that that's not all you needed.
Yes.
In order to be able to live your life, because you were away from your family, you were away from any kind of store to acquire anything. So you had to have a lot of skills in order to be able to make your what was an uncomfortable life as comfortable as possible.
Exactly. And actually this bag is preserved so well because he ended up storing his Medal of Honor in it for many years. So that's probably why it is in such pristine condition after, 120 years. But just the story of this little bag is amazing.
Yeah, and then he held on to it, and then something to him.
Yes.
Makes a big difference. And so now we have something from the Boxer Rebellion.
We sure do. The next two items belong to a man named Carl Petersen. And during the siege of Peking, there were some Americans trapped. And he went in under fire, snuck into the city, and because he was a machinist, was able to repair a water system and get a gun working so they could help defend themselves. So that's what he received the Medal of Honor for. And again, we've got an example of the need to mend or make do. This is actually his needle case. And you can see here on this end, it says 100 needles. So there's no needles left in it. So apparently he used all of them to great effect. But he would have kept his needles in here in order to make sure that he was able to mend and do what he needed to do. The other item I have of his is this is called a continuous service certificate. And certificate is kind of an odd name for us because we think of a certificate as one page. This is something that he used to keep track of all of his service. So let me get to the page here. I apologize. Let's be on the other side. Anyway, see, he's got in here his petty officer appointment paper and a few other things. And the idea was that sailors at the time had to keep track of their own service. And see now here, we've got kind of his own ratings. This is his descriptive list. So it talks about what he looks like. His health record, here you see it's excellent. And the reason they had sailors do this was for proof of a pension later on. Here's the page I really want to share with people. You see here, he's listed all the ships he was on and the dates he was on. What's really fascinating about this is up here, you have February 2nd, 1902, awarded Medal of Honor. So this was actually scratched into his continuous service certificate. And that was important at the time because there was a push about 10 years later to start awarding recipients of the Medal of Honor a special pension. So this is, you'll see it's got this little book and his little strap is gone, but it would have tucked in there. So this is an important piece he would have carried with him because it was pretty vital to proving his service later on.
So I think these objects really represent how things have changed.
Exactly.
How the experience of these individuals in the early military and as time went on are so different. I mean, just the needle case, you think about the durability of uniforms these days they're designed to be ripstop, to be able to withstand and not to have to be mended. Whereas they obviously didn't have the fabric technology to be able to do that. So a service member had to be at the ready to mend any rips or tears themselves.
Yeah, and that includes, if you're in the Navy, they had special needles to mend the sails. They knew how to tie ropes, and modern Navy today as well to a certain extent, but knowing how to tie the different knots and how to mend a rope and how to make a net, all these were things you had to know because obviously those things were very exceedingly important when you're mostly under wind, but they did have steam vessels as well.
And obviously no chance to get resupplied in any kind of easy way. Yeah. I just think about these young people who were in the military, you know, in their 20s. This is a huge amount of responsibility to have to catalog your own service and carry it with you.
Yes.
In battle and make sure that it makes it through in order for you to be able to get your pension. I mean, that's no small feat.
And there are cases of, at least I know a few Medal of Honor recipients, it happened to others, where the ship went down and they lost their continuous service certificate. So then they had to try to recreate it. Most later in their lives, there's a lot of letters going back and forth between them and the pension office trying to prove their service and that they did indeed serve 20 years and they deserved a pension. And so we see that today, unfortunately, too, with our current veterans is sometimes proving your service is difficult, but it was especially difficult when there was this was the central repository for keeping track of your service. And if your ship went down or you happen to lose this book, you could be in a lot of trouble. It could take a lot of time to try to reconstruct it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So we have another book coming up next, right?
This book belongs to a man named Henry Nickerson, and he received the Medal of Honor for the Mexican campaign in 1914. And this is the ship he was on. You can kind of see his name here, Nickerson, and on the inside you can see it a little bit better, H.N. Nickerson, USS Utah. And this regulation book is something that they have even today. I believe now it's mostly digital, but they used to issue these books for every ship that went out. And it has in it the regulations from everything you can think of. The piece I want to share with you today is this is a section that tells you when you're airing out your hammock, depending on which berthing area you were in, where you went to actually air out your hammock. And on this other page here, it tells you the path you have to take within the ship to get from your berthing area to the airing out area. So here is actually a picture of this actual ship as well in 1911. So anyway, this is a really interesting piece because it just shows how regulated ships had to be and functions, correctly. And you were responsible for knowing the contents of this book. So, you had to read all that tiny print and all the tiny rules and know it.
And while that might have become digitized, the need to know it has not changed for our modern services.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah, so having a regulation book like this, what year?
This is from 1911.
1911. So again, in excellent condition, but I'm sure there's a lot that has changed in terms of requirements, though I'm sure much has stayed the same because on a ship, you need to do things in a very specific way because you are in those confined quarters, you do have limited resources, you do need to make sure that everyone's following the rules and the protocol and everything.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right, so what do we have up next?
Up next, we kind of make a jump from 1914 to World War II. We're going to talk about Vernon McGarity, who is right here in this photo. And he was part of the Army again, and his unit was surrounded at one point by Germans in Belgium, and he went off on his own. He really encouraged his men that he was with to hold on the line, and they held it for as long as they could until their ammunition ran out. And Vernon McGarity was out in front, exposing himself to fire through a lot of it. And in the end, when their ammunition ran out, they were all captured and made prisoners of war. So the item I have to share from his story is this simple little spoon. And this is the spoon he was issued in the POW camp. And you can see all the nicks and scratches in it, which really sort of helps tell the story of it. I mean, it's really an unremarkable spoon. And if we didn't know that this is something that was vitally important to him as a POW, we wouldn't know what the importance of this was. But if he had lost this spoon, he probably would have had to eat with his hands because they weren't going to issue him another one. So the fact that this spoon has survived since 1944 and we have it now is remarkable, as is, of course, everything we have here. But just the simple story it tells of the POW experience. And we have a few letters from him as well during that time, but I love how this simple item has such importance behind it.
Do you know why he kept it? That seems like something that you would either want to hold on to or want to get rid of, but just trying a marker of an incredibly difficult time in your life.
Right. Right, and unfortunately, he had passed on before it came to us, but I think just the fact that he held on to it for all those years shows how it was important to him and vitally important to him. Because obviously you're not going to hold on to something that, you know, throughout your life that, you know, doesn't have importance. And so, you know.
I think it's also a symbol kind of triumph, you know, he was able to get through that experience, and was obviously a hero, you know, he obviously did, you know, some wonderful things. We don't have any objects here, but you know, eating is one of those things in the military that, and I go into schools with students a lot, and a lot of their questions are, what do you eat?
Yes.
Obviously not something that we would necessarily have an object for, but that is something that, you know, a lot of these Medal of Honor recipients, if their experience would have changed significantly throughout the time. And I'm sure there's documents that you have that kind of tell about that and how, how they, again, we were talking about the lack of resupply, and how much of a problem that was. And I know in Civil War, significant issues with food being available, and then even once you're deployed on a, you know, long-term deployment during World War II, you know, there's a lot of challenges that come with even feeding them.
Exactly, and you were in charge of carrying your own kit, so you'd have to have a canteen and probably, you know, a bowl and the basics, right? And you're carrying that with you in addition to everything else that we've already mentioned. So it's, you know, and the ones from the Civil War is today we ate mealy peas, and it's just, you can't imagine. But it's, unless you're a veteran, then I'm sure you're familiar with these things. But just kind of the deprivation, but the triumph of getting through it.
Yeah. And so a lot of these objects we've talked about so far represent that personal side, but we're sort of essential. And so our next object here, we're going to talk about Maxwell's, that is a little bit more personal and a little bit more kind of represents a different side of him. So you want to talk about that one?
Exactly. These next two pieces come from Robert Maxwell, World War II Army, and he threw himself on a grenade to save his commanding officer when they were being overrun at an observation point. And so the items we have from him is, this is his New Testament and Psalms. And here on the inside, you can see his name and who it came from, who was his chaplain during training at Camp Roberts. And we've got his service number over here. And so I'm just going to open this up. So when you shrink, of course, scriptures down this small, you're going to have some tiny little print in there. So, and I just love this. I love the wear on it. It shows that he used it. He carried it with him. And here we have the Gospel of St. John. And here, let's see if I can get it to do it. Oh, it works. He's got a little bookmark in here. And this is John the Baptist baptizing Jesus. So obviously this was an important part to him to leave that little note in there. So, and this just testifies to how important faith can sometimes be for those serving in the front lines.
Yeah. And so are these something that would have been issued or something that are optionally issued?
Possibly. In this case, it was given to him by the chaplain at his training camp. But I mean, and sometimes they came from parents who sent them. Sometimes they bought them at the commissary. I just love that it's something that was obviously important to him and that he carried with him.
So as we were just discussing, you know, you really, when you think about the length of a campaign of World War II and the heaviness of the objects that you had to carry with you, there's a lot at stake in terms of making those choices about what you want to have with you during that journey. And kind of we see here that he chose to give himself some comfort in having that Bible, kind of make that long journey with him, and then save his head.
Absolutely, and keeping it for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this a little bit already, but just a lot of times with Medal of Honor recipients, we see them as these heroes. We see them as their action. We see their citation. When they go talk to people, people want to know what was the day of your action like. The most,
what were you thinking?
Right.
That's
what were you thinking?
question.
You know, throw yourself on a grenade, and then that moment can kind of come to define their life. Whereas your work helps show that that is one moment in a much larger story.
Right, and so it's the men behind the medal, and that's what these personal objects can tell us about. In particular, when you're talking about faith, when you're talking about this symbol that this spoon that this gentleman carried with him the rest of his life, the field mirror. I mean, all these objects have a story about the man behind the medal, which is a big part of what I try to preserve here.
Yeah, and we have a letter as well, right? Also from World War II.
Right, and this is, we wanna switch, actually, we've got.
This is Bob.
Yeah, that's
Maxwell.
We're on Maxwell a little bit later in his
on
life.
in his life, yes.
And the next person we're talking about is Forrest Vosler, and he was the radio operator in a bomber over Germany in the American Army Air Corps. And their plane was horribly twisted and damaged when it came under attack, and he had injuries to his eyes, his face, his legs. I mean, just in horrible shape, but he continued to shoot the gun that he had access to, and he was able to repair the radio equipment and send out a distress signal right before the plane was crash landed in water. Despite, of course, barely being able to see, and he also helped drag one of his comrades out of the plane while they got the dinghy set up for everybody to move into. So he received the medal for that. And what we have here is actually a letter that was sent after that action when he's recovering. And what I love about this letter is this paragraph right here. I received 3 letters from you today. It sure was nice to hear from you. It's been months since I last heard from you. I never thought a letter could mean so much. It made me feel like I was close to you again. I love you and miss you so much. So this is a soldier airman who is recovering, and it's just so poignant as to how important it was to hear from back home. And really, this form of correspondence, of course, nowadays you have emails, you have Zoom calls. So it's a little bit different today, but I mean, letters, of course, exchange as well. But I love that how much this shows how important it was. And by the way, it turned out that the mail, because the postal service is called, hadn't heard from the state land. So
Happy ending.
yeah, the letter after this is, I received a bunch of mail from you. And so it really was, but it's just how important it was and how much he was longing to hear from home, which I think is something today's servicemen and women deal with as well.
Yeah, and we can intellectually understand that it took a long time for a letter to arrive to our military service members in previous wars, but when you have an object that really shows that emotional impact, not just the intellectual knowledge that the timeline was long, that's why this work and these objects are of value, is to help illuminate that picture. And again, any letter like this that they received, well, if he was in the hospital, a little bit different, but you make those choices to keep them with you, to expose yourself potentially. If you are captured, then they know your family members' names and everything. So as they are receiving letters, knowing, deciding what they do with them, and then bringing them back home. And I know that there's the other side of a lot of these collections of these family members and then the military service members, and being able to look at them kind of lined up and see those conversations that of course were incredibly delayed.
Yes.
And I know I've heard stories about, the letters that crossed in the mail, that, it doesn't always have a happy ending, but the fact that there is the opportunity to correspond and that we can look back and get a better understanding of their life and their loved ones through these letters.
But what I see a lot, I just want to say, is a lot of these, like he was in we've got a whole series of his letters home, Forrest Vosler's letters home, and he repeatedly downplays his injuries to his mother. And I love that. He's trying to protect his mom. So at one point he had to have a nurse, write his letters for him because his eyes were bandaged up. And it was just, I love that. I love that he's trying to minimize what happened to him just to keep his mom's mind and worries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we see that a lot actually in veterans letters home, soldiers letters home.
Right. And I just want to remind everyone who is watching, we are going to take questions at the end. So please make sure that if you do have any questions, just type them in that Q&A box. And Laura and I will get a chance to get to them as we kind of get toward the end of the presentation. But we do now, we're going to move from World War II to the Vietnam era. And we have a few recipients from Vietnam. We'll start with Sammy Davis.
Sammy Davis. Here you see him, obviously more relaxed in Vietnam. And he received the Medal of Honor for saving the lives of multiple men. Part of his action was blowing up an air mattress. He couldn't swim, but he blew up an air mattress and kicked, floated across the river to bring some men back to safety on his side of the river. So I love this.
Yeah. Well, again, this is what it looked like at base camp.
Exactly.
Where a lot of these objects kind of are relevant. Yeah.
And the piece we have to share today, this is his harmonica that his mother sent to him while he was in Vietnam. And he would play it, and it's just a symbol of something that gave him comfort, and probably some of his brothers in arms comfort while they were over there. And you can see from my hands here that this is a larger harmonica. And today he loves to tell the story of the harmonica and how he plays Shenandoah and Forever Many at the camp. And it was just a piece of home. And it kind of, I guess, made downtime bearable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't think about. You know, again, we hear these heroic battle stories, but there was a lot of downtime, a lot of time just sitting around waiting for something to happen and having to find something to fill that time.
Yeah. So it's a sample of, you know, something you could do. We've got the Bible, of course, you know, reading. There were a lot of books maybe that were passed around camp.
Again, not as much of an access to entertainment
Exactly.
in World War II or Vietnam as our service members might have now, or education. I know there's a lot of opportunities for current service members who were deployed. Yeah.
You want to show the picture of Sammy now?
This is, more current picture of Sammy, and I will say we again, all of these are on our website. So now Sammy is one of those who you can watch his whole story on our website. You can on the recipient page, you can always search any of these recipients and find their direct link to their page so that you can learn a little bit more about their story. So next we'll have.
Next, we have James Fleming, and this picture here was actually taken on the day of his Medal of Honor action. So we've got a really good insight as to how he looked that day. And he was a helicopter pilot in the Air Force. And he flew in to rescue 6 special forces men, and he landed his helicopter and placed under heavy fire. It was so heavy, in fact, he had to take off and land again. And he was kind of precariously perched on the edge of a river. But he did it, and he got those 6 guys out. And that's despite, of course, the heavy firing that took out his windscreen. And he kept at it until he got those guys out. And today, what we have from him is, again, downtime. This here is a little cap that he and another Air Force officer kind of, if you will, stole back and forth from each other on the lark. The other gentleman's name was Captain Jacobsick. And here on the inside, you see he even, you know, put his name on it to say this is mine. But obviously James Fleming won that particular battle because this came in with a collection of items that he sent us. So, and you can see some of the wear and tear on it. So this would have been something they probably wore probably back and forth just to egg each other on. Like I've got it now, that kind of situation.
And so how did you learn that about the hut?
Well, what was really fascinating is Colonel Fleming sent in a couple boxes of items, and I was able to get on the phone with him and say, okay, why is Captain Jake's hat in your collection? So he was able to share that story with me. So it was important to kind of, none of these items mean that much if you don't know the story behind them. I mean, it's arguably just a hat. But knowing the story behind it makes it this charming piece of history and tells you something about the men who were stealing it back and forth, you know, a little bit of fun. So
So that makes your life a lot easier as an archivist when you have the person who can give you that backstory.
Exactly.
And that's part of your job,
Exactly.
is to get that backstory from his head onto a page so that if someone's having this conversation in another 50 or 100 years, that it's kind of, you've unlocked the story behind the object and it's down for future generations.
Right, it's preserving it for future generations, absolutely.
And finally, we have a jacket here.
Fatigue shirt. And this belonged to Charles Hagemeister, who passed away, unfortunately, just back in 2021. And he ran out under fire several times and set up defensive measures in order to pull injured men back. He gave them medical aid, comfort, and just really, I mean, a lot of people back from under fire, and many of them survived. So this is his jacket. You can see over here his name badge, Hagemeister. It's a little faded, but so is the rest of the piece. And that's just, again, like with the spoon, evidence that it was worn and used and has a story. And so he gave this to us, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm very glad we have this piece in the collection as well, because it's like in the memorial to a man who passed away not too long ago.
Absolutely. Well, these clothing items, which we'll talk a little bit more about next week, but we think about these individuals were wearing their uniform pretty much the entire time, sometimes for weeks on end while they were out employed in the field, no opportunity necessarily to freshen up. And so it's a huge symbol of their time in the military and their time in the field.
And we'll have, like Noah was just saying, some more next week where we actually focus on, if you will, the tools of the war. So we'll be talking about, we'll have some weaponry, we'll have some more uniforms, some more pieces like that we can really share. And instead of the personal, we'll be talking about the job, the occupation.
Yeah. So the two sides to their time in the military, kind of how they lived their everyday life, and then how they did their job, how they accomplished the mission that they were setting out to accomplish. And you can find information about how to register for that on our website. You can just click on events and it'll come up as our next webinar. It's going to be on October 26th. So you can register for that. If you can't join us live, just like this one, we will record and post it on our website. So an opportunity to go back and rewatch, or to watch if you don't have a chance to join us live. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions. So we have a couple of folks who are curious kind of why this conversation is ending at Vietnam and why we don't have more objects from, our current service members or individuals from kind of the war on terror. Right. Obviously, there was a specific question about Desert Storm. Our collection is limited to that of Medal of Honor recipients. So there are going to be some time periods for which we don't have as robust a collection because there aren't as many recipients.
Right. And for example, Desert Storm, there were no medals of honor awarded for Desert Storm. So that's not really an era that I would collect on, except next month, we will be looking at a pair of boots from a recipient who served in Desert Storm, but his medal was from Vietnam. So there are some cases where I would collect outside of that, but our collections are really limited to Medal of Honor recipients. And as to the war on terror, a lot of younger veterans are it's still attached to them. It's still a raw, fresh memory. And so sometimes they're not ready to donate things to institutions. And so honestly, that's why we don't have anything to share today. It's certainly an area we're collecting in and looking to collect in. And I will say we're working on growing in that direction. Let's put it that way.
And I know you and I have talked before as well. Sometimes there's just more gravity to a printed typed letter that was mailed home, and a recipient or an individual might, in their mind, not see an email as being as important, even though for the record, it is. That is our modern typed or handwritten letter home.
Yeah, and that's something that archivists and people, curators, we all kind of deal with. This is the temporal nature of digital media, whether it's photographs, emails, a Zoom call that you made home. A lot of times those things are not preserved or seen as important, and they certainly don't have the physical presence that a typed letter has. It certainly doesn't negate their importance, and they should be saved and kept for the future because they document, just like this letter does, they document the personal experience. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their mind around that. And so there are institutions, and I've done it a little bit as well, as helping people preserve all those bits and bytes that are out there in the Ethernet that are important to keep.
Right. And I think you see that evolution with our videos as well, which are another kind of facet of the archives program. A lot of our current conflict recipient videos have that primary source footage, even have drone footage of the recipient themselves in the field.
Exactly.
So we are able to share a lot of that with other folks through those videos. So that's another great resource for our kind of more modern ones. We don't have any physical objects on our table here, but it's something that absolutely is available on our website.
Absolutely.
We had a question come in about how Medal of Honor recipients kind of use their experience in the field to succeed in life after service. And that's going to be the topic of our third in this fall series. We're going to dive a little bit more into it. But is there anything that you can think of that we can share on that now?
Well, I mean, I've got to tell you, the vast majority of recipients, I mean, their experience in war, just the tenaciousness you learn, the logistics you learn, the skills you learn in the military can be applied to civilian life or even to a further career in the military. And particularly in war, when you're under that pressure, I mean, can you imagine? You know, you're going to learn to deal with it really well, which of course has massive implications or if you get out of the military. So really, veterans, they learn so much just being on the field and learning how to pick and choose and make choices quickly. And so that's why
an extreme documentation and meticulousness that we saw in the journal here.
Exactly. And that's why veterans make such good employees, really. It's because they've learned on the ground, boots on the ground, real life application of skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone has asked, would you go over the process of working with family members when you bring new pieces into the archive?
Okay, well, the first thing I tell people is I want to make sure they're comfortable with where it's going. I'm obviously honored if it comes to the society, but I want to make sure they're happy with it coming here. So I kind of start from that perspective is, you know, maybe they want to look at a few other places, and that's fine, and I'll walk them through the process. But when things come in here, it's about documenting. So when it comes in, I don't want to bore the audience because this part gets really pedantic, but it's really, you know, documenting. It's photography. It's, you know, like I would have made note that this is a little dog ear from wear and use. And then it's sending out some legal paperwork saying that, yes, the person donating it means to donate it to us. And then it's cataloging and it's keeping it there. But really with the family, it's really just making sure they're making the right decision. They're comfortable with it coming to the society and having the recipients oversee the care of those items. And then it's, you know, making sure that all the legalities are taken care of. So really for families, it's a comfort in knowing that their things are going to be preserved and secured. And it's also making sure that I do my part to make sure that happens. But it's not really too big of a burden on the families, except for maybe they're letting go of, you know, their family heritage, but they're sharing it with the nation and for, you know, the country's history. So there's a feel-good piece to it as well.
And that no item is too small.
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
it's not just about the metal or big flashy pieces, it's about the collection as a whole, or it's these small objects that might seem valueless but hold huge value in the history.
You know, I mean, when that came in, I was just shocked, one, that it still existed, and second, that the family, you know, thought enough of it to send it in. And that's really what I tell them, you know, is honestly take and pack everything securely in a box and send it to me. And then I will go through it, because otherwise you could miss something really interesting and important, like the
yeah, absolutely. We did also have somebody ask if we could go over the recipients' names along with their associated items.
Okay.
So if you want to run through those really quickly, but I will also say when we post this on video on YouTube and on our video library, we'll include a full list of all of the recipients with links to their pages so that you'll be able to access those later.
Absolutely. So. Okay. Well, we have Charles Depuy, or Depuy. We aren't really certain how it's pronounced, but we've got his field mirror. Robert Galbraith, this is his sewn bag. We've got Carl Petersen, it's Petersen, the needle case and continuous service certificate. We have Henry Nickerson with his USS Utah regulation book. Vernon McGarity with his prisoner of war spoon. Robert Maxwell with the 2 pieces of religious text. Forrest Vosler with a letter. Sammy Davis with the harmonica, James Fleming with only one end, Fleming, with the hat, and the shirt here, this is Charles Hagemeister.
Thank you, Laura. And Judy, we see your message and we will reach out to you directly as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of your treasures with us. We are almost out of time, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But we do encourage you to sign up for the next webinar where we'll continue the story and talk more about some of these objects. So don't forget, you can find more information on all these recipients, the medal and their stories.
And their contact information.
On our website, yeah, so you can always get in touch with us. And here at the Society, we are grateful to our donors who make the work that we do possible. The Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, the Bruce McCall Family Foundation, Delta Airlines, American Airlines, the Fisher House, and so many others. To find out more about our supporters or how you can help to continue the Society's work, please visit our website. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar.
Yep, see you next time.